Hi, I'm Dana Harris Seeger. Welcome back to my Baltic Handmade Life. In this video, I am going to show you step 2 in creating felt wool embroidery. Step 2. So now that we have our felt pieces all attached, the next thing we want to do is make a stitch. You could call it a whip stitch or an overhand stitch that secures it down, because it will sometimes pull depending on what your application is. If you put it on a curtain, it's probably not going to get too much wear and tear. But if this was an item of clothing or a bag, it would definitely get rubbed up against things. So I think that the best way to secure it is to add additional stitching. And I'll show you how to do that. I'm using this pretty large eye embroidery needle. It's pretty sharp so that it can go through the felt and the fabric. And I've got several different types of embroidery thread. The one that I'm using for whip stitching is this DMC floss, embroidery floss, and it's easy to get, easy to use. You just pull it out of the hank here, and it's a 6-ply, which means that there are 6 different strands, so you can separate the strands either one by one, or you can separate them in half. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull 3 apart so that it's a little bit less bulky and you don't notice it as much. And the trick is to get a color that's going to match your felt or be a little bit darker. So it's best to err on the slightly darker than slightly lighter side, because with most threads you'll notice it more if it's lighter. So I've got this blue for my blue felt, and I've got this dark navy for my navy felt. And I'm going to start with the lighter blue. So I'm going to cut a piece like I normally do that's about my arm's length, maybe my arm's length and a half. And then I'm going to take the thread, the floss, and separate it in half. And you'll notice that it starts to kind of twist. So my usual way of doing this is to anchor it somehow, this part that I'm pulling away from. And I usually do that by putting this end in between my knees, and then I just sort of separate and it comes out and pulls as I go. You can just do this slowly and kind of try to untwist it as you go, just by kind of stroking it in your hands, and then keep pulling apart until the whole thing is in half. Now I have 2 lengths that are the same, and I like this length because it doesn't, I can easily go in and out as I'm sewing, and I don't have to pull beyond my own arm length, which can sometimes get hard to do. So now I'm going to thread the needle, and if you want to make sure that you thread all of them through. If one is accidentally doesn't make it through, then just rethread it or stick that one back in. And then we're not going to sew it double, but I am bringing a little bit of the excess over so that it's easier to handle and manage a longer length of thread. And then we're going to do our easy knot so that we have a little knot. And then I'll start on one end and work my way across. So the first thing that we want to do, so we're going to start here and we're going to just work our way across the piece. And you can start from anywhere on your felt applique, but I like to start somewhere where it's easy for me to jump to the next one if I have enough thread. So I'm going to start down here. That way when I get back around, I can easily go to this next petal and then go to that next one. So I'm going to start underneath by pulling a knot, pushing the needle through the felt and the fabric, and that's what the back side looks like, and then pulling it through like that. And then I'm going to go down on just the canvas. And you can poke, turn it over and pull it through if that's easier for you. And then turn it back over, poke it up through the next, just a little bit to the side, pull it through, and then go back down so that it's just on the edge. So you're basically just wrapping the thread around the applique. So you could continue to poke down, pull through, poke up, pull through, poke down, pull through, or you can make it a little bit faster, and when you poke it down, don't go all the way through. Instead, poke your needle back up through the felt and the canvas where you want it to come back out. And now you have that stitch and you're ready to do the next one. Down and out. This takes a little bit of practice to get the hang of making your stitches straight. If you're working on a curve, sometimes they'll kind of go at an angle. But just go slow, and if you make a mistake, you can always pull the thread out of your needle. So just go ahead and pull the needle out of the thread, and then you can always pull it through, pull it back, you know, if you make a mistake. Then just re-thread it and start again. So down and up. And it doesn't matter if you go from right to left or from left to right, whatever's comfortable and whatever will be easier for you to work around. I tend to move the fabric around a lot, especially if I'm working in my lap. It really goes, it moves around a lot. If you don't really need an embroidery hoop for this part because the applique is already on there, so you don't need to stiffen anything up because the felt is already stiffened. But if you feel more comfortable, you could put it in an embroidery hoop. Just be careful that where the hoop comes in contact with the felt, it's gonna kind of crimp it. If you come to an area that's the seam, so right here I've got the thicker area, the part that I stitched, it might be harder to do this type of stitch, so you can go down. Careful you don't poke yourself. And then pull it through and go like that. And then you just continue onward, and then when we get to the other side, I'll show you how I just kind of jump to the next one. Your stitches don't have to be that close together. I mean, at this point, you're really not, it's really just an added bonus how that you're stitching it down. So they don't have to be super close together. They can be a little bit farther apart. What I would suggest is trying to keep the stitch lengths even, which if you're new to this, it's going to be a little bit tricky. If you're not new, I even made a little longer stitch here. But the goal is to keep these stitch lengths the same. That makes it look a lot more even. All right, so we're almost at the end. So now when I want to go to the next one, if I'm finished, if it's close enough and it's not going to be a really far jump, if it's really far, then you might just want to knot it and start again. But if it's close enough, then you can just drag your thread over. If you need to move to another spot that's, you know, maybe not across, but up a little bit, then you can weave your needle and thread through the back of the stitches to kind of keep it secured until you want to move it over like that. But for this one, I'm just going to kind of pop right over there. And so I'll have a little bit of a bridge, if you will. And that's okay, especially if you're working on something like a curtain, because you're not really going to see the back. If you're worried about avoiding snags, then I probably wouldn't go farther than an inch, maybe a half an inch, especially if it's going to be like clothes that you're going to wear. So I would knot it and then redo the same thing that we did before, knot and then pull it through. But if it's something like a curtain, then you just continue your stitching. And then once we have all the outline, the appliques stitched down like this, then we're going to take our crewel thread, our wool yarn, and we're going to create the decorative accents and the other embroidery like the stems and stuff like that. So that'll be the next step. So I'll see you when this is all stitched down. All right, welcome back. Now that we have stitched down all of the felt pieces with matching thread, got the yellow gold, the light blue, and the dark blue. Now we're going to add details. I'm going to use a white, these are all wool, 100% wool yarn, actually fingering weight yarn, and I'm going to use them to embroider. And the first one I'm going to use is white. All of the interior decorations are going to be in white, whether that's the dark one or the light one. And I think I got two colors of white here, so I'll have to choose. And then the light blue is going to be for things like stems, for the flowers, any decorative designs I've got. And then the gold is going to be for the parts of the gold flowers. I've got a needle. This is just an embroidery needle. It's a little bit dull. It's not super sharp. You can use a pointy, sharp one if you want, but because the fabric that I'm using is so open, it's not a really super tight weave, I don't need a super sharp needle. And I want to make sure that the eye is big enough that this thick yarn's going to go through. And I'll have some scissors, and the first thing I want to do is sort of trace where the embroidery is going to go, so I have a pattern to follow. So for that, I'm going to use just a regular pencil. So the first one that I'm going to start with is this one over here on the bottom left, and the design that I'm going to use for the interior of the flowers kind of like mimics the shape of it, so it's just kind of like a W. So I'm just going to lightly sketch that out with my pencil. And then the stem is going to go kind of like this. And then it has these three little sort of droplet shapes that I'm going to add with the blue, pale blue. So white, blue, blue. And these droplets I'm going to do in back stitch because I think that would show up really nicely. And the other ones, because I want them to stand out a little bit more, I'm going to do in stem stitch. So I'll briefly do a demonstration of that, but I think I did another couple videos of embroidery and I have them explained in that as well. So if I didn't do a good job in this one, you can go back and look at those other ones. Okay, so let's start with a length of white thread or white yarn. Get some scissors to cut that. And I don't want the piece of thread to be too long, because if it's too long, it's hard to pull through. If you wet the end a little bit, it sometimes makes it easier to poke through because it's super fuzzy. So because I'm not going to see the back, I could knot it, or I could just weave it through. Let's say I'll weave it through some of these threads that I've already got on the back. Oops, don't want to pull it all the way through. Weave it through. You can always snip it off later, but that way it'll kind of stay while I start stitching. So I'm gonna poke up, and for a back stitch, you're kind of moving backwards. So I start by pulling the yarn through, making sure that it's nice and flush, flat on the bottom, on the back. And then you start, your first stitch is just going to be like a basic back stitch. You're just going to go in and then back in through, up through that same hole. It's another reason why I don't want really long lengths of yarn, because it tends to knot. Okay, and then I'm going to go past and come back up. So I'm going to go like about, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch in, and then I'm going to go back up where I came out of. And I'm going to try to keep my needle straight along that path, and what happens is the thread will actually kind of S-curve, and it looks really pretty. It's called a stem stitch because it's sort of laying against this one like that. So to switch directions, what I'm going to do is, since I just went down in that hole, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go down here and then kind of past. So I'm going to go down back into that hole, the corner hole, and then past. I'm not going to go back up, but I'm going to go past it. And that forms my first stitch. And then I'm going to go back into that one and come up. So I'm kind of doing, I'm trying to repeat what I did before, and now you can see that the way that it's laying is going to be a lot like this one. And then you go back down. So I'm skipping over this part. Again, trying to keep my stitches even and coming out where that last one went in. And if you mess up on which direction your working yarn is, which side it is, you can always just switch it by going underneath. Like if you realize that it's on the wrong side, just pop the needle underneath the stitch. And now I'm going to go down into this hole to switch directions again. Back up, just like I did before. If you're doing long sections, you won't have to do this part. And then turn it back around. And then again, I'm going to go down and up. So that finishes it off. It's a little wonky. On the back, I could tie it if I wanted to, tie it in a knot, or again, I could take advantage of these stitches and just weave it in. It's not going anywhere. If you were going to wash this like a garment, then I would tie it and then weave it back in. Same thing here, tie it off and then weave so that your tails are tucked in, but there's still a knot. All right, so that is how I do all of the interior designs for these guys. And now I'll show you how I'm going to do the other parts. And if I was, again, not doing this for a video, but normally I would keep this on my needle and do as much as I could with the white until it ran out. But since I want to show you different colors, I'm just going to go like this. Alright, so now we're going to work on these little guys, and like I said before, the other one that I did is in a back stitch. So I'm going to do this one in a back stitch, also to show you a different stitch. I'm going to start by weaving, let's start with this one, weaving it through the back. Again, I don't really have to knot it. Start by just poking it up through. There we go. And for a back stitch, you can work backwards or you can work forwards. So whatever's easier, whatever feels more comfortable and intuitive. Let's see. Once I get going, I'll be able to figure it out. But to start the back stitch, what you're going to do is you're going to go, after you come up, you're going to go in and then back up. Kind of like you're doing a running stitch. That's the first step. And a lot of these have like an initial stitch that you have to start with before you get going. And then, just like the name implies, you're going to go back. So you go back, and then you pop up, hopefully equidistant from where this one is. So on the back side, it's going to look like a really long stitch. But on the front side, it's going to look like kind of like a continuous running stitch without any holes in it. Without any gaps. Okay. Now I'm kind of doing the forward method. Down. And then I'm going to follow my line. So I go back. So this stitch is going back. And then I extend past where that one went in. Or came out, I should say. And so it kind of looks like a continuous running stitch. And then I'll show you what it looks like on the back. Kind of looks almost like a stem stitch on the back, but you're not really being too concerned about the direction of your, or which side your working yarn is on. But basically the backwards version of stem stitch. And what I found is that if you're going around a curve, especially a sharp curve, if you're going around a curve, especially a sharp curve, smaller stitches are better. So you can decrease your stitch size if you're working on a curve with the back stitch and the stem stitch. And it will help make that curve look more curvy and less like herky-jerky, because sometimes it if your stitches are too long, it can make it look like it's, you know, like it's not a nice curve, rounded curve. And I'm not using any kind of stabilizer. Like I said, this is a pretty thick weight fabric. I'm not pulling my stitches super tight, so I don't really need a stabilizer or a hoop. A hoop I feel like would kind of crease some of the, if I had to, crease the felt. Plus the felt is pretty stiff itself, so if you feel more comfortable with a hoop or using some kind of stiffener, then go ahead. But it's not something that I use a lot. Unless I'm working on a fabric that's really stretchy, like knits. And then to finish, I think you kind of know what we're going to do. We're going to go back in. That will complete it. Pull it through to the back. And then if there's enough closeness, I can just jump to the next part. If I have to go really far, then I'll either weave it in or I'll make a knot, cut it, and then move on. But with this one, it's pretty close. So what I'm going to do is just find the next part I'm coming out, pull it through, and then double check on the back that nothing's loose or tangled or anything like that. And then I carry on with my back stitch. Back stitch, stem stitch. We'll do one more stem stitch here, and then you pretty much get the gist of how we're doing this. You make your first stitch and go back to where you started. And I'm going to keep my yarn on this side. And then I'm going to jump this way. So I'm going to basically equidistant. And you can switch the direction that your working thread is on the side based on what direction the curve is going. You'll notice that sometimes if you're this direction and you're curving that way, that the yarns will kind of separate. So just move it to the other side and you'll see that it'll form kind of a nice curve as it lays against the lays against itself. So if I'm curving clockwise, then I'm going to keep my yarn on the or I don't know, concave. Then I want to keep my yarn on top, and if I'm going convex, then I want to keep my yarn on the bottom. Maybe it's the opposite. I don't know. Whichever direction you're curving, keep your yarn on that side. You'll see as soon as you start to do it what I'm talking about. See, if I were to keep my yarn on this side, it would get kind of baggy. So makes a nice finish. And then just weave it in the back in on itself. Makes it lay nice and flat. Trimmy trim. And there you have it. One done. 20 more to go.